Okay, everyone, want to introduce again my friend Karl Krantz. Yay!
Hello.
Big round of
Thank you very
applause.
much. Thanks for sticking around. I know it's getting towards the end of the day here. Wait till my slides get up here. All right. So I'm Karl Krantz. I'm the founder of SVVR, which is Silicon Valley Virtual Reality. Next slide. So we are a mission-based organization, and our mission is to connect the global VR community. Next slide. Did I get it? Okay. So we actually started as a meetup. We were actually the world's first VR meetup. There were actually some groups in the 90s in the first wave of VR that were called user groups. But in the second wave of VR, we were the world's first VR meetup. We're still the world's largest VR meetup group. We still host monthly events. In Silicon Valley, we've been doing monthly events for 5.5 years now. Every month, people get together, try demos, meet each other, try the latest and greatest, and talk about everything in VR. Next slide. So we are best known for our conference and expo. We've done 4 of these major conference and expos at the San Jose Convention Center in Silicon Valley. Our last event had over 2,000 attendees, over 150 exhibitors, close to 200 exhibitors, and we covered every vertical of virtual reality. Next slide. And we also have a space in Mountain View, which is a partially event venue, demo center for virtual reality. We do executive education, and we have a membership program for companies that need a home base in Silicon Valley because they come there often to do demos, have meetings, and they need a place that has all the right space, the equipment, all the latest and greatest hardware and software and everything they need so they can just show up, do their demos, and host their guests and leave. So primarily our members are companies from outside of Silicon Valley, usually outside of the US, who will come to Silicon Valley often. And we also do more and more now executive tours. So we bring groups of C-level executives from Fortune 500 companies that come to Silicon Valley, and we bring them through virtual reality. We show them the future. We show them the latest and greatest hardware, and as a kind of neutral, independent organization, we're not actually selling them anything. They're a lot more likely to trust us than if Oculus is telling them how great the Oculus is or HTC is telling them how great HTC is. We can tell them, here's VR, here's all the cool stuff happening in VR across the board, all the different approaches, the companies, and all the use cases. And we focus on where it's actually making an impact right now. Next slide. We're also international, so we have chapters in Korea, Japan, and we're working on Taiwan right now. In our international chapters, we host events in these countries, and we work very hard to connect the communities there with the communities here in the US. So next slide. So running events that are on the VR theme for years, we've been getting asked this question: why can't I attend this event in VR, right? If VR is so great, why can't I attend using this technology? And for a long time, I always answer that question saying, well, if the tech was good enough so that you could actually come in VR, we wouldn't need to be hosting these types of events and building up the industry and moving all this stuff forward. Next slide. So, but that is changing, and that's really what I want to focus on today. We want to solve that problem. That's actually the whole reason I started SVVR. My background was in telepresence. I'm really interested in this idea of crossing distance using technology, allowing technology to mediate barriers. This is what makes hosting VR events, VR meetups, and VR conferences interesting to me, is because what does this look like in the future, right? So, you know, the ideal vision here, I think, is you have an event like this, or a conference, or a concert, or something like that, where you have physical people there, and you also have the virtual people there. Ideally, if technology wasn't a barrier, there would be, you know, holograms sitting in the room with us, people you could interact with, talk to, and it would be just like being there. Of course, that's not really possible right now. Next slide. Really, what we need is a level of a display technology that currently is only achievable with CGI, something like, you know, what Magic Leap has been promising. That's obviously a ways off, and that only solves part of the problem because that's just what people in the real world are seeing. How do the virtual people see an event from all different angles? We need some sort of light field cameras, things that just don't exist. So the perfect vision of a mixed or extended reality event is not really possible yet, but some cool things are definitely possible. Next slide. So when we think about, what do you do in an event and how do I solve this problem, we break it down into the behaviors. You attend a session like this, you're in the audience, you're watching someone on the stage. There's me, I'm participating in this event as a speaker. There's expo floor that you'll wander around, you'll want to try demos. And I think the most value that people get out of events are these serendipitous encounters where you run into someone in the hallway or waiting in line to try a demo, and you meet someone interesting and build a relationship there. And private meetings are the final kind of behavior that people have at events. But so far, VR events or live events have been, next slide, primarily done with a kind of an app-based approach. Maybe we're streaming an event to an app, download our app around this event, watch the keynote with this app, usually just 360 video. The 360 participants, the people watching in 360, you don't feel like they're there. We don't know where they are. They don't have a representation at the event. There's a camera somewhere in the venue. So we don't remember those people as actually being at the event. And they don't really feel like they're there because we don't feel like they're there. It's not a very good approach. Next slide. There's also been a little deeper app-based approach where they start to add social. So you are viewing a stream of an event, a 360 stream or something else, with a few other avatars that are in whatever platform you happen to be on. So this is the approach taken by Oculus venues, maybe the Wave VR, Next VR, companies where you can view a sports game or something, but you're still on a single platform, a single event platform, or a platform designed for multiple events, but still kind of a rigid structure for this. It's not a good way, if you want to do a VR industry event, to have a VR to do this because a lot of the people are working for competing platforms. You can't say, hey, everyone, download this Unity app or download this one social platform to attend this industry event when half the people there are working on things that compete with them. It just doesn't make sense. What does make sense is a more pragmatic approach where we leverage the existing social VR platforms in virtual worlds. So next slide. So the best known social virtual world would be VR chat. VR chat has tremendous traction. I think right now a lot of things are happening in there. Communities are forming. You can go in, you can customize your avatar, talk to people all over the world. They support a wide variety of headsets, hardware, tracking equipment. You can wear trackers now. There's a number of third-party peripherals that are working with VR chat. And there's amazing things happening in there. I think they're hitting somewhere around 30,000 concurrent users at peak. Not all of those users are VR users, but they are getting some serious traction. And they have, I believe, over 4 million installs. They're not the only social platform. AltSpace is another one that's been quite popular. They were recently acquired by Microsoft. Next slide. AltSpace actually started off right from the beginning focusing on connecting to live events, but they're really focusing on this kind of stream-in approach where you go into a room in a social space in VR, and there's a surface that is basically a giant TV screen, and the people there are watching a keynote live. And when they say live, typically it's using YouTube or some other technology, so it's not truly live. It's more like 30 seconds delay on average. Those virtual attendees are not actually represented at the event. There's not an interaction. So it's still not really a workable solution, although it is a slightly more interesting solution. All right, next slide. So I talk about social VR platforms and virtual worlds. They're fairly similar, but I think there are some differences. They share this idea that there's communities happening in VR, people hanging out. The avatar is the focus. The user becomes focused on their avatar and the other avatars. But I think the thing that separates the true virtual worlds is user-generated content and an economy. So a true virtual world, next slide, I think Second Life, which was actually a pre-VR virtual world, is the best place to learn about what that can be and all the possibilities. And I think the best place to learn about what the future of VR will actually look like. So Second Life actually has a user-generated content. Everything in Second Life was made by the users. The company that made Second Life just made the tools. All the land was hosted by users. You would have to buy land, and that's basically space. You're buying like a web server, a host. You can upload content. They're scriptable. You can make objects that have behaviors, almost become apps. You create environments. And it created this really interesting world. Next slide. With a really interesting marketplace. The marketplace has millions of items for sale, really vibrant. The economy of Second Life in virtual goods, people buying land, clothes, chairs, objects for their virtual houses, and mostly accessories for their avatar, was over $600 million annually in virtual goods at its peak in Second Life. Second Life's been around for, I think, 13 years now. It has peaked out a little bit, but it is still somewhere around 70 to 80% of its peak, so it's still going strong. That's another interesting thing about virtual worlds, is that they don't tend to die. The user behavior in virtual worlds is really interesting. The average user spends 25 plus hours in Second Life, which is amazing. That's a lot of time to spend in Second Life. 25 hours per week, sorry. And the amount of things to do and see, because all of these spaces have people that care about them. This is a map. You could never see all of Second Life, and it's changing so fast that it's impossible to see it all, because by the time you get halfway through, everything's all different. It's enormous in scale. And I think that this is going to carry over to VR. The best example so far has been High Fidelity, which is actually a kind of ground-up reboot from Philip Rosedale, the creator of Second Life, the original creator of Second Life, but made for VR. And they are basically taking all of the lessons they learned in building this large, scalable virtual world with a vibrant economy, and the momentum they were able to build, and the things that actually worked that they figured out, and applying it to VR. Next slide. So one of the interesting problems that most of these platforms have, stuff like VR Chat and AltSpace, they're built on Unity, and they're building these multi-user spaces. And just because of some limits of the technology, typically the rooms, the individual spaces, kind of max out at around 20, 30, 40 people. So it's really hard for someone like me who throws a conference or an event where, it's very normal to have hundreds of people. You can't do that on the VR side right now and actually have them all be in the same space. That's a bit of a challenge. But High Fidelity is the only one that's really breaking through this. They've been doing these concurrency tests, and they've architected in a very different way. They built their own engine. And their numbers are going up. They're now over 400 people at once. Next slide. Which is actually, they do this every month. They do these concurrency tests, and it's quite an amazing experience to be in VR and be surrounded by 400 plus other avatars where all the audio is mixed. If someone's all the way on the other side and they yell loud enough, you can hear them. You get the crowd murmur. Everything is mixed. They do a really interesting job in this that is quite appropriate for events. A prediction I'd like to make around this stuff is that when people become attached to the social VR worlds, they become attached to their avatar. They prefer to do things as their own avatar. I actually believe that it's going to be a lot less friction in trying something new by going to a place inside of a virtual world than there is in downloading an app using a traditional app store distribution mechanism. It just makes more sense. Like, I feel like myself. I want to go to an event feeling like myself, or I want to try an experience, play a game, when appropriate, in my own skin. I don't want to feel like an alien wearing someone else's avatar. It's very awkward. So I actually predict this is going to take a while, and it's very contrary to the business models of many of the big guys right now, but I actually think that this is going to make a lot more sense long term, and that apps and games become a lot more like virtual location-based entertainment inside of these large virtual worlds. So the problem with these virtual worlds, though, there are many of them. They're really interesting, and we don't get to find out what's happening in them. They're separate from us. They're siloed off. They're separated from each other. There's not a lot of cross-activity happening, and it's really hard to find out about the interesting stuff that's happening in there. So, next slide. So SVVR, as a community organization, we realized there is not a lot of people with an incentive to connect to these virtual worlds, so we created an initiative to do that ourselves. So we call that the Multiverse Initiative. And the idea here is that we want to bridge these virtual worlds with the physical world and with each other. So it's kind of solving two different problems, but solving it in a single way. So next slide. So instead of taking a live stream and putting that on a screen in a space, what we want to do is create windows between the worlds. So a two-way window. So a two-way window between the real world and the virtual world. Next slide. And do it in a way where we can also use the same technology and the same mechanism we came up with to do a virtual world to virtual world window. So you could be inside a VR chat talking to someone in high fidelity, for example. So we've chosen an architecture for this, basically built on HTML, standards to the rescue, while most of these virtual worlds are kind of playing with their own standards, playing in their own ecosystem. They're not really looking to interact with each other. Most of them do render web pages, or at least they have it in their roadmap. They want to render web pages. So that's our hook, that's our opening. So we realize WebRTC video is really powerful, provides low-level, low-latency communication, is really, really effective. And with WebRTC media servers and the right combination of hardware and echo cancellation and stuff, we've created what we call, next slide, the reality portal. So next slide. So the reality portal, what it is it's just a big screen, a big telepresence device that we stick at an event. So if we had a reality portal here, which we actually looked into doing and unfortunately couldn't make the numbers work this year, but maybe next year. If we had a reality portal here, there would actually be screen on the wall, one or more screens on the wall where there would be avatars that are actually watching and interacting, and I can ask them questions, I can point to them. The spatial relationship is maintained between the audience, the speaker, and the virtual side audience. So next slide. So we've been prototyping this for the past 1 year plus at all of our monthly events. So if you've come to an SVVR meetup in Silicon Valley, you've probably experienced this. We connect now with the virtual world high fidelity because of the openness of that world. It's very scriptable. We didn't really need to ask permission. We just are able to do it. And as you see here, we have basically life-size windows between the worlds. Eye contact is maintained. The virtual side sees the opposite of the real world side, so they see a window with video on it. So while it's not three-dimensional video, it's not holograms, that technology is a little bit further away, it is a workable solution now for virtual audiences to attend physical events. And we've actually had some quite large audiences attend some of our events. We actually have multiple screens at this event here, multiple screens of avatars attending. And you can even actually recognize, I don't know if some of you may know Kent Bai, you may recognize his avatar right there. Chaos Princess is pretty well-known high fidelity user. But we get regulars and people come as themselves and you can recognize them. And we've had many interesting serendipitous encounters. People, oh, I know that guy. It's quite effective. And we've experimented some with using it beyond just the audience use case. Having a speaker, you could have a speaker on stage. I could be here via the reality portal where I'm actually back in Mountain View and my avatar is on a screen and I can see the audience. We are looking into combining panels so that we can have a panel that is half humans, half avatars, all interacting with each other in real time. The thing that really makes this work is that very low latency WebRTC video. We're talking, 200 milliseconds, including the speed of light. So 100 milliseconds or less in actual encoding and decoding latency, which is, perfect. That's better than a cell phone call these days. So next slide. So we've been doing this for the past year or so. We've just recently started bringing this out to external events. We brought it to Maker Faire where we won an award, an Editor's Choice Award. The kids went crazy. We found some really interesting behaviors around this. The kids immediately got what was happening. I'm talking to the avatar. The adults who are not VR people, we noticed, had a much harder time. They initially thought it was an AI interacting with them, and then they thought it's mirroring and they're trying to like mirror, and then the people on the virtual side would play with them and try to copy them in real time. And it led to a lot of fun games, where people were throwing things back and forth, and really fun kind of novel interactions. But I think this can go a lot deeper and be a lot more meaningful. We brought it to AWE, we brought it to more recently Virtual Identity Summit. And we find that it works really well in a number of cases. It works really well in a hall like this where there's a speaker, a session, or a seminar. It also just works out in a lobby area because you get these serendipitous encounters. Ideally, in our vision, you would turn every surface in a venue into a reality portal. So, next slide. So if I look at the behaviors at events, the reality portal so far has, all the ones in green, it's actually quite effective at. So we're getting most of them now. We actually think that this approach is good enough to attempt a large conference, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But right now you can attend sessions, you can participate in sessions. The expo floor is a little trickier. Combined with telepresence robots, you would actually be able to move around, and we are looking into working with some of these folks that create these robots and figure out how to do that in a way that is economical. But I think the most important parts are the serendipitous encounters. That is very effective. And private meetings. We actually have one of our conference rooms in our office set up to have these telepresence meetings into high fidelity, and we've actually closed some deals using this, which is very weird. It's very awkward to be on one side when you're interacting with avatars and you're trying to read their body language, because we just don't have the fidelity of facial expressions and body language there yet. But we have actually managed to close some fairly large deals for us using this technology as our primary meeting method. So if you want to see this in action, next slide. Our next event where we will actually have this will be the GDC VR Mixer. So we've been doing this event every year. It's an awesome event at GDC, typically about 1,000 people. We have a demo dungeon. It's in this super futuristic nightclub in San Francisco. So that's on March 20th. That'll be the next chance to experience it. And then, next slide. And then we're going to go all out on this for the next big conference that SVVR is doing. So that'll be VR Expo 2020. This is a bit technically complicated, so we need to give ourselves a little extra time to get it all lined up. And we want as many platforms supported as possible. So on our end, while we can work with any platform that can render web pages on the social VR side, not all of them are there yet. A lot of them have it coming. Platforms like VR Chat are not quite there yet, where they can render any web page that has video, WebRTC video safely. So this is coming. This is how we are going to answer that question that we've been asked. If you're running VR events, why can't I attend in VR? We're going to show the world that we can do it, and we can do it in an open, multi-platform way where you can attend in the skin you are most comfortable with. So with that, thank you very much.